guys, this video is about messy mod work. We've all heard everybody talk lately about the terrible modders and the terrible modding practices that's happened, and we've always warned people to stay away. But for a beginner, it might be pretty hard to know what is bad mod work. We've all seen the pictures online of all the terrible things floating around, and we all know the names of the people that are notorious for this, or at least I hope we all know the names. But I didn't want this video to just be picking on those people, because that's not really fair. A few years ago, there was a thread on a forum that started out doing that, and it started out with genuine intentions of posting pictures of people that were really ripping other people off, whether they intended to or not, they were. It was terrible work, they were ruining consoles, and that thread very, very quickly derailed into just trolls talking about people's personal mod work, and it was awful. And I don't ever want to discourage anybody away from this hobby, and I certainly don't want anybody to think that myself or anybody I'm associated with is ever going to sit here and, and single you out and call you out for stuff that you do personally. But at the same time, I really need to get the information out there of the people that are doing terrible work, and people are mistakenly buying it. So I figured, who is a better person to make fun of than me? So rather than point out other people, I'm going to take work that I did when I first started the website. And in fact, a lot of the pictures that you'll see are from before there even was a website, before I was just kind of experimenting on stuff to see, if all of these crazy guides I'd seen on the forums even worked or not, and to test different methods. So I really figured that this was a positive way of going about this. Rather than wag my finger at terrible modders, I'll just make fun of myself, hopefully have a laugh, but also, and more importantly, show examples of bad mod work, but also explain why I did it that way. Because I think that's a really important thing as well, because a lot of these guys aren't ripping people off on purpose. They just don't know any better, much like I didn't know any better. So I explain an example of bad mod work, why I did it that way, and the correct way to do it. And I asked Voultar to join me because he's always very vocal about these things, and he does great mod work himself. So without further ado, here is all of my old shitty mod work. Feel free to point and laugh. But also, I hope that everybody takes away from this the positive aspects, what to look for, what not to do. And I hope that all of these people that you see, selling bad consoles and ripping off people that don't know any better, the more that we all become aware of this stuff and the more that we can stay away from it, the less we'll see bad mod work get sold. So here you go. Here's Voultar and I talking about my shitty mod work. Okay, guys, so I have Voultar here to talk about my messy mod work. What's up, man?
What's going on, guys? How's everyone doing tonight?
So I'd like to start with this first one right here, and you can see this nice dab of glue with some tape covering those resistors. So this is something I see very common, and I wanted to explain why I did this, so that people might not make the same mistakes. But I also want to show these pictures, of course, so that people will know what not to buy. So the reason I had this glue here is because I was having the resistors that I soldered to the multi-out ports fall off. I would ship them back and forth. I never modded consoles for sale, but I would ship them to friends and stuff, and they would get there and something would pop off. So how I was soldering these was I was taking a bit of wire and stripping the end, and then kind of curling it into a circle and sticking them over, and then soldering it with a cold solder joint. So the other thing that I was using was, I didn't realize, but I was using a wood-burning iron and not an actual soldering iron. So the things that I have learned, and then I want you to comment afterwards, because this is kind of basic, so I'm not sure how much you'll be added to this one, but simply using the proper tools and tinning the wire will make any job that you're doing, like this, any large component job, not only will it make it infinitely easier, but it'll look a lot better, it'll be a lot better, and it'll go a lot faster. So simply by using a decent soldering iron, constantly cleaning the tip in the tip cleaner, and then tinning each wire before and each solder point before going at it. would make it better. So you want to add your thoughts to this?
You know, I don't know what you want me to say, Bob, other than LOL. These are all very good points, and I'm so glad that you're doing a video on this. I'm kind of doing the same thing, trying to show people better, proper techniques, good techniques that are friendly to beginners with soldering on my YouTubes with a few of my videos. And you know, the most important marriage between anything in your soldering work is good flux and good solder. Well, good flux and good technique. If you have both of those, there's no reason to ever put this Peter North substance on any of your systems to hold this stuff down.
Right. So I have another picture I'll put up now that's basically I think it's labeled 11 for you. So this is what happens when you tin the resistors. You also tin the multi-out pins, and then clean the soldering gun really good between each. And then when you connect them together, that's a solid connection right there.
Yep.
The only thing I would suggest for this one is, these are obviously all test bed pictures, but for somebody doing it permanently, I would put heat shrink tubing over the resistors so that the back ends don't touch any kind of metal component. But other than that, I mean, while there's at least for the SNES Mini, I prefer other solutions. That seems to be a decent enough installation for somebody that wants to do it themselves.
Sure. And if you're looking for visual cues on if whether or not your soldering is any good or if it's particularly bad, look at the shape and texture of the joint itself. A well-wetted joint will have a nice smooth fillet. So if you look between the wires and the resistors that you have there, you've got these nice sort of oblong, very smooth. There's no pitting or anything like that in these joints, and they're also very shiny. And those are both key indicators that you have a nice, well-wicked solder joint and that you've done a good job. If it looks bubbly, if it looks a little darker than this, or if it looks kind of like a golf ball in terms of its texture, redo it, because that's not going to last, and that's what's called a cold solder joint.
Gotcha. So just to reiterate this point, the reason I used glue on this one was because the solder joints weren't lasting very long. And that's because I had cold solder joints, so just simply by tinning wires and using proper tools, it made the glue completely irrelevant. And on top of that, just because this is the first mention of glue, do you want to explain what happens when you put glue over solder joints?
Well, what can happen when you put hot glue over solder joints? A couple things happen. One, it's a pain in the ass for people like me who have to go back and they have to redo the work. Number two, when you use hot glue, if you have a high temperature hot glue gun, you're actually doing more damage than you are good as far as any sort of bond you're making, because that hot glue gun will probably operate between 160, maybe even 180 degrees Celsius. And for a lot of solder chemistries, that's right at the melting point of solder. So when you glue over some of these joints, it's plausible that you are weakening them by sort of reflowing the solder with the hot glue, and you're doing yourself a terrible disservice. You're going to get poor performance. The crappy solder that you had before the hot glue is going to be even worse solder after the hot glue, because now you're messing with the chemistry, because you're heating hot glue, and it could be mixing just a little bit with that solder, because that solder just might reflow just a little bit when you introduce all that super hot glue.
Thereby worsening the connection.
Thereby worsening and weakening.
Weakening. So right. my beginner rookie mistake of let me hot glue this down to make it more secure was in fact actually making it less secure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, so now this is one that's common, and this is one that I didn't really figure out myself until my buddy Phil just brutally made fun of me for it. So this is the sRGB chip on a SNES Mini, which for beginners is really hard to solder to. I mean, you have these pins that are very close to that the cartridge slot. It's really hard to get the wires there. And even when I was tinning the wires before actually doing this, it was still so hard to make the connections. I would very often jump two pins together and then have to use solder braid to get it off. So I thought I was doing a good thing by putting a dab of glue in there, and that looks like more than a dab, but remember, it's a tiny chip. By gluing that down there. So what we just talked about, of course, is I'm actually weakening the connections by putting hot glue onto solder points. But the main reason I felt like I needed to do that is because I couldn't easily get those 2 points to connect. And that's when flux changed absolutely everything. So just by putting flux on that area, and then first of all, I was able to very easily tin those pins on the sRGB chip, and the solder didn't go between them at all. And then when I had tinned the wires, everything just connected instantly, and it was a really, really tight connection. So do you want to talk a little bit about flux?
Well, yeah, flux is the most integral part next to good technique of good solder work. And the purpose of flux is flux prevents when you're brazing or when you're soldering two different metals together with a common metal like tin, which essentially is what makes up 70% of solder.
Mm-hmm.
Oxidation layers in between keep or prevent a fast, quick wetting joint to be made. So what flux does, it prevents your metals and your alloys from oxidizing. So you'll get that quick, rapid, smooth solder joint really, really fast when you use flux. And the reason you don't get that super fast, quick wetting joint when you don't use flux is because the solder has to fight all those layers of oxidation. So if you use flux and you use it like a champion, in the last two videos that I did, I used it very liberally, a lot more than I really needed to, but I just want to show people that flux is your friend and you need to use it liberally if you need to use it. But you need to use it at all times.
So in a bit more beginner layman's terms then, what I would describe flux as, when you put flux on an area like the sRGB chip, or the pins of the chip, not the chip itself, obviously. When you put solder on top of those pins, the flux makes the solder stick to the metal a lot better. So
that's exactly right.
when I was adding solder to those sRGB pins with the flux, when I did it correctly, what I would do is I would put a little bit of the flux on it, either with a flux pen or just by using a drop or two. And for anybody that sees any of these videos that sees the drop go on, don't forget that they're all zoomed videos, so it looks like you're dumping a cup of flux on it, but it really just is a drop or two.
Yeah.
But I would then put a little dab of solder on my the tip of my soldering gun, and then touch it to the pins, and they would stick instantly. But also, if I did accidentally bridge two pins together with the flux on that, all I had to do was drag my soldering gun across it again, and it basically stuck to the pins and not individually and not itself.
That's right.
So that last photo in there, that actually shows, I guess, the correct solder joints, and it was so much easier with flux.
Yeah, that
And
looks.
yeah, and you can see in the very last picture, I even, bent the wires properly, put some tubing over it, and kind of ran them over to the side. And while there are better ways to run the wire here, the purpose of this is strictly talking about these solder joints. And that not only does it look perfect, but it not only is it infinitely stronger, but it was so much easier. I mean, like, holy crap, easier. So there you go. For a lot of people that are holding things in place because of that, flux really removed the need for glue in a lot of these things that I was doing. And also, I would use flux at this point on almost every single thing that I solder, especially vias, the little metal holes that you solder to. Is
Yep.
there any time that you wouldn't want to put flux on something?
There are several different variations of flux. You have what looks like a very thick paste gel with almost an amber color to it, like a rosin flux. I like to use that when I tin conductors or wires. So if I have a wire that I need to tin, or a ribbon wire with several, stripped conductors. It comes in a jar. I'll just open the top of it. I'll take my wires and I will just dump the exposed copper in there,
Hmm.
and I will tin those up. And that's the kind of that I recommend using that kind of flux for tinning wires. Now, for board work, like you're talking about here with the Super Nintendo, any kind of alcohol-based no clean, which is a liquid. It's a clear liquid flux that leaves a small residue, but it's what I would recommend you to use for any sort of mainboard work. So, like the Super Nintendo, just a drop or two, or 2 or 3 drops of this no clean solution, and you have an excellent um, 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 performing substance that will make your soldering 10 times better.
Gotcha. So for on boards, you want that liquid flux, and while you could still use that to tin wires, that goopy kind of sticky glue-like substance of flux you use for tinning wires. But
Sure.
for beginners, you could just buy the liquid and stick with that. You'd
Oh,
only want to buy two if you're starting to do a lot of mod work, then, right?
right. That's right. That's right. So if you do have the no clean and you want to tin some wires, it's just a little more of a. It's kind of a. It's just a little more difficult. But you turn the bottle upside down and you just put a few drops on your copper, and then you tin it that way. But the thing with no clean though is too it evaporates very 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 quickly. Within a matter of 30 seconds, you could dump an entire bottle on a main board, and in maybe 2 minutes it would totally be evaporated.
Yeah.
So you have to work quickly with a liquid no clean. Whereas
Gotcha.
the gel stuff, you have a little bit longer to work with that.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. So flux good, glue bad.
Yep.
Okay, now on to the funny stuff. I am wholeheartedly taking shots to the face here, but in my defense, I will say that these pictures were all taken before the site was live. This was me screwing around, going, "Can I make this work? Which guide on the forums are correct?" So it was a lot of trial and error and redoing and doing again. So a lot of these I just want to put up here now just to make fun of myself because it's funny. But so let's just quickly go over what's wrong with this picture.
Well, I'll
So
let you do that.
there's no 75 ohm resistors on the output of the circuit. There's no capacitor coupling the power on the circuit. But that's picking, that I'm kind of just, splitting hairs here. Obviously, it's the big wad of goop over the multi-out, but it's also the really, really long cables. So, people that I guess the best way to keep it short is analog cables are like antennas, and the longer they are, that changes the signal. There's more chance of interference, so you always want to keep your cables as short as possible. And while
Right.
this was, of course, a test bed that I just kept long so I could have the circuit up, this is a very good example of what not to do ever. Anything else I miss on this one?
No, good example. This is what I like to see.
Okay, I'll move on to the next one. So this is an interesting picture because this has a faux pas and it also has something that
Uh,
I would defend to a point. So obviously on the VDC NUS there's glue over it. It's the exact same thing we just talked about. If I had only used flux, it would have been easy and I would have never used that glue. And having the glue on there causes more damage than good. But those other 2 points, remember that in these zoomed pictures it looks a lot bigger than it is. But those two dabs of glue are not on any circuitry, and the only purpose was to make sure that those wires stayed tight and neat. And while I would not want to see this on something I bought off of a professional modder, especially because there's way cleaner ways to do the N64 mod, generally speaking, um, would you look down upon this as tacking down just for the purpose of tacking down wires? And of course, for anybody watching, I'm talking about the left and middle glue, not the glue on the chip.
well, no. No. I mean, it's not the prettiest way to So many things are aesthetic, and so many things are just being kind of cunty about this stuff. But as far as gluing down long leads or long runs of cabling, uh, there's a that's a perfectly this is a perfect reasonable utility for hot glue. Um, I have all kinds of pictures where you see me doing this kinds of stuff here. Um, Not with hot glue, but with glue
Hmm.
or with some sort of adhesive. And if you do it right, I
Well,
don't know.
actually, you have a picture, which I'm going to make sure to put in this video, of a PlayStation 2 chip installation that you did, that you used glue to keep all the wires in place, and it looked awesome. I mean, not only did it look nice, it's very obvious that you needed to keep them tacked down so they don't pinch on anything.
Well,
So,
that's important because you never know who's going to open this system up in the future, right? And so
mhm.
if you have a lot of slack and you have a lot of loose conductors floating around, who's to say that they're not going to accidentally rip a couple of those out, just manipulating the board and taking it out? So
Mhm.
what you've done here, even though the glue's kind of nasty and I don't really like the layout or the routing of the wiring,
Mhm.
no offense, this is perfectly acceptable. Glue down long runs of cabling to keep things tight and to keep things to keep things pulled in. Totally acceptable.
So, just the last couple points before we move on this one is this is an N64, but this is not how I would recommend you doing the mod. This is really just an example of tacking down glue. And also that almost every time I've done something like this, the glue will eventually dry out and pop up. So if the purpose of using glue is to keep them in place while you reassemble and then maybe travel to wherever it is that you're going, it's fine. I just wouldn't expect glue to last hot glue to last permanently. And also, in situations like this, I wouldn't want to see this on a console that I spent a lot of money on. But if somebody sent me this picture saying, "Hey, I just I modded something, I needed to tack the wires down. What do you think?" I would say, "Good job, good call." So,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, totally fine.
okay, on to the next one. So, I really, there's not much point in having this one up other than I really wanted to have a laugh at this. I think this was literally the first N64 mod I ever did. I think I just, as you would imagine, connected wires to each the start and end point, and then had them floating in midair so that I could attach different chips to it to see which would work best. But holy crap, everything about everything about this is wrong. Literally, I think this is another example of just what to never do, never see. No isolation on anything. Cold solder joints on everything. There have been situations where I've needed to put a chip, not a surface mount chip, where I've wanted to do it solder directly to it so I can make it as small as possible. But it was mostly just for inside cables and experimenting. There's never an excuse to use a surface mount chip inside a console that's not on a PCB board, especially because of how cheap these things are. I mean, they're pennies for those boards. Um,
Right,
so
right.
did I forget anything other than
No, I mean this is a chapter and verse case study of what not to do.
yeah, and it's not just that I wanted to have a laugh at this that I included it in this video, but I've seen eBay work look like this.
Oh, sure. To this day, I would say that there is more. Let me just put this out there very broadly. I would say that the RGB modded systems that you see for sale on eBay, the majority of them, the caliber of work in those systems are on par with this and any better.
The problem is there are some really, really great modders that sell on eBay. It's fewer than the mediocre to bad modders. So, but at least with videos like this, we could show people what to look, what not to look for.
Yep.
So moving along, I want to show a trick that I used to use. Now, this is really for do-it-yourself installs, but um, this is, and there's much better ways to mod N64 and SNES Minis nowadays, but you could kind of apply this to anything. So what you're looking at here is 3 vias that I normally would attach wires to. Now, I'm showing this not for the context of the pictures, but or for the console, but for this cool technique. And I think I saw it. I must have seen it on a forum somewhere because I don't think I'm creative enough to come up with this myself. But what that is, so those 3 pins are barely inside the motherboard. Because that's the other thing, since we're talking about it. Whenever you're soldering to vias, make sure that you don't put whatever you're soldering to them through to the other side. You want to keep it just about at at the location of the motherboard. But that's basically resistors that I use that I cut the legs off. And in the next picture, you'll actually be able to see what I did. So those resistor legs went through the vias, and then I put a pre-made chip over it. And then I used double-sided tape, not to hold it into place, but just to make sure that it doesn't rotate and so nothing could short. So this very last picture I want to show, you know, it's a SNES Mini installation, and it's wrong. So before I even talk about it, the C-Sync wire, the thin blue one, shouldn't be there. It should be somewhere else. There's other components that need to be on here. But I wanted to use this as an example, not of a SNES Mini mod, but of just mod work in general. So I hope I'm not confusing anybody by showing this picture. So just please bear with me and just pretend this isn't even a console, right? Just pretend it's a circuit board somewhere. From that perspective, from components on circuit board, I kind of wanted to pick this one apart because if somebody sent me a picture and said, "Hey, I just did this to my own console. What do you think?" For the most part, I think it's perfectly good. There's a few things that I'd point out, but I'm going to let Zach get to that. But generally speaking, this is what a lot of the mediocre and up modders on eBay would do. And while I would never say that buying this, I would never say that you're wasting your money. It could be done better. So, Zach, you want to point out, and once again, just pretend this is any components on any circuit board and ignore the mod, ignore the mod itself. Just the installation. Can you point out the things that you see? Because I have one glaring mistake that's jumping out at me, but I'll let you go through it first.
Well, I like the idea of anchoring the board to the vias with those nice little component legs. That's actually a pretty neat little trick. The biggest thing that pops out to me is the soldering could be a lot neater, but more importantly than that, the resistors on the outputs that transmit the RGB video signals, those could be heat shrunk. And those need to be insulated because if you look at that picture, it's obvious that they're very close to each other. And if those short, there goes your picture. So biggest thing,
if somehow, in some way, it got squished down, now you're shorting up against the cartridge pins.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So that was the big one that always jumped out on me, is I should have slid heat shrink tubing over those wires all the way up to. And would you cover the resistor with the heat shrink tubing?
It's not necessary. You just want to cover the. You want to cover and insulate the exposed conductor. So the copper from the wire going to the lead of the resistor is really what you're after. But it's okay if you want to go ahead and just slip that heat shrink over those blue resistors. That's
so it doesn't hurt it to cover those.
Doesn't have any impact whatsoever. That's the most glaring thing to me are those resistors.
Now the other thing that I've seen that you were the one that actually convinced me to start doing is these are well insulated wires, but if I had left them connected together. The white wire I may or may not have been able to do that. The bottom, the longest one. But if you leave, ribbon wire connected together, doesn't that overall make for a tighter connection to everything?
It makes your connections and it makes your connections more rigid for sure. And it also makes the mod work much, much cleaner. I've been preaching about this for years, and I try to showcase this in every one of the videos and pictures that I show people. But if you keep the wiring connected and you don't separate it, there's no use in hot glue or any sort of adhesions to keep all of your work, close and tight together. The ribbon wire does that for you. So a little ribbon wire that's connected, that isn't dismembered, will go a long way, and it'll make your work so much not only cleaner but easier to do. I mean, it's so much easier to work with 3 cables at once than it is splitting them apart and then doing each connection by connection. Keep
Maybe with experience, I did find that it's harder. It's harder to work with ribbon cable and stuck together than it is to just neatly run individual wire. But it's something that I got used to pretty quickly.
Bob, I'll learn you.
Agree to disagree, I guess. Or maybe I was doing it wrong and I eventually just figured out how to do it the proper way.
I'll
But
show you how it's done.
so that actually brings me to the conclusion. You're having a bunch of modding videos up now, correct?
That's correct, Bob.
I
That's
believe
correct.
you have an N64 one up there, and you show how to assemble a surface mount SMD component board at the moment, but you have more coming in the future, right?
Tons of videos, tons of content. Yes.
Will you be doing one on basic soldering instructions?
That's one that I really want to tackle. Yes, I absolutely will be doing that video. I'm just right now brainstorming everything that I would like to incorporate in that video that's very informative and effective, but it's toned down to a level to where a beginning person or somebody with very novice soldering experience wouldn't feel overwhelmed. So I'm just fine dialing and tuning the video and the concepts in the video so that it's very gentle for people who don't, who are interested in doing this stuff but have really no experience.
Right, and if anybody's watching and his basic video isn't out yet, you can comment down below and get any suggestions. I'm definitely going to verbally abuse you while you're making that video and make sure that it is beginner friendly. Because while I've been doing this for a while, I'm certainly, at least today, out of practice. I haven't touched a soldering gun in like 6 months. But I'm by no means an expert. And that's why I kind of like my tutorials, is because if I could do it, anybody could do it. And that's also why I'm happy that we did this video, is because I'm totally happy making fun of myself. But I'm also happy, all the guides, at least, that are on the site now show the right way to do things. So, if I can improve and if I can do it, there's no excuse for anybody else to. So.
That's right. That's right.
And lastly, before we go, I just want to show examples of good mod work. And since you took the time to do this with me, I'm going to show off yours because it's only fair.
Oh, God bless.
But I want to start with the SNES Mini because I think this is a perfect example of the difference between a mediocre mod and a good mod. So once again, the mod we just showed, if you did that yourself, be proud of it. There's still room for improvement. But this is why I really love stuff like this. I mean, check this out. It's 4 wires, run perfectly together. It's clean. I love stuff like this. Any thoughts?
When I designed all of these boards a while back, I did them in a way to where I could really take advantage of ribbon wire, and I could keep all the ribbon wire together and have a very nice and clean installation. So all of this stuff is really designed for ribbon wire, and once you work with it for just a little while, maybe take a day or two to really get it down, the process of using it, these installations like this will look so clean and they'll go so fast. Also with Kynar wire that a lot of people I see mod shops and stuff use, I don't like it because the scope doesn't lie. Kynar wire has a very thin jacket, and signals on the board are routed by engineers. When you take these wires and you just they're going over various parts and routes of the board, they can pick up a lot of interference. So that thin jacket on that Kynar isn't helping you. With ribbon wire like this, you have a much meatier, thicker jacket that surrounds the conductors. So you have just that much more insulation to help protect your cabling and your conductors from picking up noise from the board. So that's another big perk of using ribbon wire like this, and that's why I design all of my stuff to fully accommodate that.
Gotcha. Well, I'll move on to the next one, which is just a shot of an N64, and it's pretty much the exact same as the Mini, and it's clean, it's easy, and all of the techniques we've talked about in this entire video. Flux on the vias, shortest wire runs possible. I even would use flux on the multi-out pins, even though they're really easy to solder to, just because
Sure.
it makes it cleaner. I mean, you could see, if you were to zoom in, you could actually see the circle around each of those pins in the multi-out. It was a great connection. So.
Yep. Yeah. Don't be afraid of flux. Don't be afraid of flux. You may use it very liberally in the beginning if you're starting out, but you'll soon be able to gauge and determine how much flux you really need to expend to get a good, solid, wetted joint. So use the shit out of it, and you'll get the hang of it.
Yep. The next picture, now this goes into the more advanced stuff, but once again, the board installation that you use really makes it. I mean, you make this look easy, and I think that's another reason I've really been pushing for people to buy these pre-made boards. And now that I don't sell anything anymore, nobody could accuse me of just trying to sell my boards. But this is really the perfect example of why I just am a huge advocate for using surface mount pre-made boards. I mean, not only is the installation nicer looking, but the wires are, a third of the length that they used to be. I mean, everything about it. And, I often get people ask, we talk about nicer looking mods, but does it ever affect performance? And to be honest, the techniques that we've been talking about to make things look nicer are the exact same techniques to make a stronger connection, to make a better signal. So, there are a few things that are aesthetic, but for the most part, if a mod looks really well, it's going to perform really well at the same time.
That's right.
Assuming you have the right board and everything.
Right. I agree with that. And again, that's just another example of the board. I designed the board all around this ribbon cable, so there are no crosses, there are no switchovers on the cabling. Everything is just a straight shot from the inputs and a direct straight shot to the outputs. So it's as clean, simple as I can get it.
And lastly, we already showed this before, but I just wanted to show it one more time. I've seen a few people do it like this, and I always this to me is artwork. Like, those wires are soldered perfect. Everything's laid out nice and neat. And yes, you do have glue there, but I don't think anybody on the planet would look at this picture and go, "Oh, look at that idiot using glue."
Yeah.
So,
yep.
Yeah, just a perfect example. Well done. So.
Thank you, my lord.
All right, man. Well, thank you. Thanks to everybody for watching. I really hope everybody takes away from this what I want them to. Of course, I hope everybody had a good laugh looking at some of my experiments and bullshit work. But I also really hope more than anything, if nothing else, I hope this helps people know what to look for when you're buying stuff pre-modded consoles. And what not to look for, I guess. So, and also, if you want to do these things yourself, you might have gotten a few tips out of this. I think Zach's upcoming videos are probably better. I really hope that people walk away from this video going, okay, now I know what to look for when I'm buying something off of eBay. Now I know what to stay away from. So,
yep.
All right, man. Well, thanks again, and I'll see you guys next time.
Okay, see you guys later.